Hello, everybody. Welcome to our workshop, Event Planning on a Shoestring. We are very happy to have you here. My name is Claudia Urdanivia. I am an outreach coordinator at NYC Parks GreenThumb. I work in the Bronx. We're the division of NYC Parks that works with community gardens across the city. We appreciate all of you tuning in today. GreenThumb, of course, is grateful for everything you're all doing to keep your community gardens safe and healthy, and we hope you and your loved ones are safe. Throughout this webinar, it is important that everybody stay muted. Twywana and I will be doing our best to keep everyone but the facilitators muted. And Twywana and I are the facilitators, so we will be sort of doing double duty with that. If you have a question or a comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll be reading it out loud during question and answer session, although we will be taking questions throughout. So please, just type it in anytime you have that and we'll keep an eye out for it. We are recording this session. You can choose whether or not your camera is on by clicking on the camera icon. And again, we will be focusing the recording on the facilitator. So now I'm going to turn it over to Twywana, who is going to introduce herself and introduce the workshop and help get us started.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad you're able to join us. My name is Twywana Bush. I'm with GreenThumb. I am the special events coordinator for all of GreenThumb, large events and events. My sole focus basically is like Grow Together, which is coming up. So please make sure you all sign up and register. It's going to be a week-long event via virtual. So make sure you guys all sign up. We have a lot of great things that we plan for Grow Together. Normally, Grow Together is in person and at a school, and it's just a fun-filled day with over 60 workshops. We have a keynote speaker, we have entertainment, and it's just really a time to, get together and like the open the garden season, since the garden season is normally April 1st. I also work on Harvest Fair, so make sure you stay tuned for those upcoming events. Open Garden Day, which is in June, I believe, this year, and Harvest Fair is in September. So please sure to look out for those events as well. So today, Claudia and I will be talking about events on a shoestring. We'll be talking about types of events, resources for events, the budget, run of show, permits, policies, and all of that good stuff. So I am going to go ahead and get started. So event intentions. So when you're planning an event, the first thing you should know is, why do I want to have an event? So like, what is the reason that you want to have an event? Maybe you had the event in the past and you're looking to increase the number of community people that you want to come into the garden, or do you want to achieve a certain goal, like a garden cleanup day? So you have to know, like, what intentions do you want and why do you want to have this event? What kind of event are you looking to have? So is it you want to have like a music festival? Maybe it's just a relaxed event where you just want more community people to know about the gardens and maybe sign up to join a garden, or you want to have a volunteer day. And then you want to know, who is your target audience? So if you have a volunteer cleanup day, will your target audience be students or will it be adults? Do you want more students to know? Do you want to get the schools involved for the students to know, so that way they are taking care of their community by volunteering and participating in helping out with the garden? Next slide. What needs to get done? So you have goals that are in place. What are you trying to achieve? What is your hope for this event? How many people do you want to attend the event? Do you want like a small gathering, or do you want something larger? Are you, as I mentioned before, are you looking to increase, like if you had this event in the past, are you looking to increase attendees numbers from previous years? What does success look like? So a successful event looks like everything that you wanted to accomplish in your goals for your event, if everything happens. So you stay on budget, everything went smoothly, and you achieve, if you want to achieve like more people coming to the garden and you got 5 more new garden members, you achieve your goal, and that is a successful event. Tasks. So list actions needed to achieve your goals. So we'll go into the different tasks that it takes for you to achieve your goal of having a successful event. Next slide. So this is just one type of an event. This is Earth Day. So you have the type of event is Earth Day. The goal is to educate the community about the environmental concepts in a fun, interactive setting. So you have run a show, and we will put all of these templates and this PowerPoint in the chat so you can see this as well. So, but goals, what is the purpose of this project or event? So the purpose is, oh, I want more gardeners to join, community members to join the garden and become members. Because right now we only have 4 members, and we want to at least reach up to 10 members, and that will actually help the garden throughout the garden season with maintenance and everything else. Then you have, who is the audience you are targeting? So again, the audience that you're targeting could be youth. If you're having like say a Halloween party or a Halloween celebration, you're targeting youth and families. If you're having a volunteer day, you might want to target youth and young adults to help out with like cleaning, putting mulch down, building raised beds, and anything else that you need to happen in a garden. What does this event relate to your mission? How does this event relate to your mission and vision of the garden? So you might want to like revision how your garden is. You want to set that like clear pathways. You want to set up like maybe a seating area for garden meetings. So envisioning how you want your event to look like. So you should begin with 2 to 3 goals for your event. We will get into how many gardens per year you can have, but I think Claudia is answering questions as well as we go along. Next slide. So you should begin. The most important part about planning an event is having a budget. Having a budget sets the tone of what you can and cannot do for an event. So say you want to have a volunteer day. So what you need to do is have a budget. You need to write down the items that you're looking to purchase, or they could be in-kind donations. And this is just a really simple budget sheet, but it could, excuse me, it could get more complex if you're adding in-kind donations. So say you went to Target and you want them to donate like 6 cases of water for your volunteers. So that's not something that you're necessarily buying, but it's something that you will probably need if it's a hot summer day. And you got an in-kind donation from Target. So you list your items out in the first column. It could be gloves, it could be rakes, it could be mulch, it could be anything that you need for the volunteer day. Then you should have a column where this says cost, but I normally do a column with actual, estimated costs. And it's just the estimated number. So say you want 500 gloves, like in the past, 500 gloves was about $200. So you'll put an estimated cost. Hopefully your actual cost is always lower than your estimated cost, but sometimes that doesn't happen. That's why we need estimated cost, and it will help you out. So if your budget is $1,000, you know that everything you need to get is within that $1,000. If you have items, or if the budget goes over 1,000, you know that maybe you should take a look at the budget and actually see what it is that you need, like you really don't need, so you can take out that item or try to get it donated. Then you have the quantity of how many you need. So if you need, if you're having 10 volunteers, you want to have 10 volunteers, you might want to have 20 sets of gloves just so that they can have 2 pairs just in case one get ruined. So things like that. And then of course you will have the actual total after you purchase everything. What is the actual total in the next column? Next slide.
All right. Thank you so much, Twywana. That was excellent. So Twywana just kind of gave you some fundamentals of where to get started. Similar to what Tywana's talking about, another core component is to really think about who is going to do what. And I know that we have many event planners among us, and that means that you probably take on a lot of different, you probably wear a lot of different hats in your garden. You're probably super enthusiastic, and maybe a lot of things fall on you. So it's really important during the time that you're doing event planning to think about who is going to be in the project's core team, so that way it's not just one person doing everything, right? So that core team is a group of garden members that are in charge of spearheading the project and really keeping everyone on track with their tasks leading up to and during the event. So you also want to think about who's going to be handling outreach, right? Because maybe the person that's organizing it shouldn't also be doing that. So if you have, with this core team that's helping you plan that event, even if it's just 2 people, you also might want to think about assigning some team leaders, especially if your project, your event has many different projects, such as the example that Twywana provided earlier of Earth Day. If you're doing an Earth Day, that means that you'll probably be having several different stations in your garden because you're trying to probably attract as many families as possible. So you want to have concurrent activities, right? So it would be ideal to be able to have team leaders who will be responsible for different activities during the event. So that's just another important part of thinking who's going to do what. And then next we want to go to thinking about what materials do we need? Because now we've identified, right, who's doing what are our event intentions? This is what we're planning to do. So this is one, in addition to the run of show toolkit that Twywana was reviewing with the Earth Day event, we're also going to be providing you with another handout that really focuses on thinking about materials. This is something that you can use when you are planning your budget, because after all, right, like this workshop is called Events on a Shoestring. So we don't want you to spend a lot of money on your events. So this is very important in thinking about the community assets that you have in your neighborhood. So it's going to really help you identify the materials, think through that whole list. What do we have available in our garden? what's available outside our garden, and is this something we need to buy? Or is it something that's available outside the garden, but we know that the local bodega, for example, can help out by donating in kind? So this material list really helps you to think about all of the different things you're planning to assemble, and then you can work through it and see if it's something that you really need to purchase, or if it's something that maybe you, your core team, your team leaders could work to source in kind. So this is pretty important because you're able to identify what you need. You're listing out some of the materials. You're listing out the person that's responsible. For example, in this example that we have here, we note that for this particular example that we provided of an annual spring cleaning day, we note that for that type of event, you're going to need compost. In this case, for GreenThumb Gardens, compost is something that a material that GreenThumb can provide. So you write that out, and you assign somebody to get in touch with, let's say, the outreach coordinator to be able to deliver it. So that is definitely pretty important. And you can also start reaching out to folks in your community to try to involve them in this process. Again, if you're thinking of a local business or a bodega owner or other aspects like that that can source in kind, that is pretty important. Okay, so now we're going to go to more about resource planning. In addition to thinking about the materials that you're going to need, you also want to start thinking about, as you're planning your event, what are the other community assets to help you promote the event? Because the success of the event is measured differently by each group. But if one of your goals is, your goals and measures for success is to attract as many families as possible to, let's say, your Earth Day event, then you really want to make sure that you're reaching out to some community leaders that you can let them know about your event, that will promote it for you. Some of the partners that the gardens may have, for instance, and maybe some other organizations or businesses that you can spread the word to. So because this workshop, I just want to mention that this workshop has been adapted from an in-person workshop to a virtual workshop. We used to be able to physically hand out the handouts and also show you these links, but we're going to try to minimize that a little bit. So we're going to be emailing you these links, but I am going to review the community asset map in a little bit to show you guys what this looks like. And it's a very basic form, but it helps you think about, who are all of these, community assets in the neighborhood. And also there's some websites to help you assess who are some community assets citywide. GreenThumb has a bunch of links, and a great resource page is Citizens Committee, which, if you guys haven't heard of that, they're a really great organization that provide grants for community-based groups such as community gardens in New York City. So recommend that you guys look into that as well. Okay, so now that we've identified those community assets, we've talked about materials, we've talked about budget, now we're ready to start planning what our event is going to look like. You're asking, about, and this is this is very important because this is basically your run of show. And if you're not going to use any of the other handouts that we're providing, and those don't seem too appealing, we at least ask you to think about this. This run of show has the time, the person responsible, your team leader or your core team member that's going to lead that activity, the activity written down, and the materials that you need. So it's a very basic chart, but it really helps you to make sure that you have all of the concurrent activities listed out, that you have people in charge, and that way you'll be able to more easily delegate your tasks, be ready, and also be prepared for any kind of potential potential drawback that might happen. For example, if it's raining, if one of the people that was supposed to come is not able to make it, you have your run of show to be able to assess that. And also you want to make sure you have a plan B. So thinking about your run of show is all really important in terms of that. And you also want to know, how long do you want to devote to each activity? So again, just think about incorporating this into your event planning, even if you don't want to use anything else. Twywana and I definitely think it's important to have this information written out. All right, so for everyone here who is a GreenThumb garden, I'm just going to quickly run through a list of policies that we have for events. This is a sort of the dry portion of the workshop, but we have to mention it just so community gardeners could be aware of what they are and whether they've been updated. So somebody asked earlier in the chat if how many events can gardeners have? What we encourage gardeners to have is at least a minimum of 2 free community events per year. So there's more information about the events policies on our website. We're going to send you a link as a follow-up. And we talked about different kinds of events, and I'll get more into that later, but you can have so many different types of events. We just kindly ask that you please notify GreenThumb in advance, just to make sure that we are aware of the community events that you're planning. The outreach coordinator will review any permits that are available and indicated in a Google form. We'll send you a link to that Google form for event submission. In case you don't have that link available, we will be following up. And notifying GreenThumb in advance also helps GreenThumb to better highlight your work in case you're trying to promote it, you're trying to get more families. That way we'll be able to share it on our website, on our Instagram, on Facebook. However we can promote it, we will be able to do that. And what is considered an event? First, I want to mention what's not considered an event. Things like group meetings, group work days, internal garden events, all of that is considered part of group activities. So that's not an event. You don't have to tell GreenThumb when you're doing that because it's part of the regular group maintenance and functioning. So what is considered an event is when it needs GreenThumb notification and approval, but again, just helping you to identify those permits. And events are also identified by NYC Parks as anything that requires prior approval. So again, we'll be emailing you that Google form, and we will also be sending an events flow chart that our colleague created to give you a better idea of what this process looks like. So I'm going to turn it over to Twywana now, who's going to talk to you a little bit about what those permits are.
Yes. So as you know, if you have, you need to have 2 events if you're a GreenThumb garden per year. And there are just certain requirements that will kind of flag your application. So permits that say you want to have open flames, you must get a permit from FDNY, and the link is there. They have a ton of required, they have a ton of listings of things that identify as a certain permit. So really, if you need open flames or anything that has a generator, that's FDNY. So please visit their website. Also, if you want to have any amplified sound, you have to go to the NYPD. And just note, because I know some of you might not live in the same area as your garden, but wherever the event is at, that's the precinct that you have to pick up the permit from. And you can pick up the permit, I think you just give them 2 to 5 days and request that permit. So it doesn't take long. And sometimes they want, with NYPD, they want to know that you have permits from other supporting agencies, such as if it's parks or if it's SAPO or FDNY, before they will issue you that amplified sound permit. Also, street permits. So say you hosting a block party that's connected with the garden, you will have to go to the street activity permit office. Due to COVID, there are so many more guidelines that are new regarding street permits. So just make sure if you host something in a garden and it spills out to the sidewalk or the street, that you will need a SAPO permit. And the link is there as well. Any tents and structure permits that's over 10 feet requires a Department of Building permit. For example, if you have a 10 by 10 tent, you do not need a Department of Building permit. If you have a 15 by 15 size tent, then you would need to get a Department of Buildings permit. So anything over 10 feet require a Department of Buildings permit. Also, if you're building a stage or a platform that's over 2 feet, you would need a Department of Buildings permit. So say you build in a platform, sometimes like tent companies, they come together. I mean, sometimes you will the tent company, they will bring like platforms, and they about like foot and a half high. You will not need a Department of Buildings permit for that. Anything over 2 feet that they're building, you will need a Department of Buildings permit for. Any commercial filming and photography that goes through the Mayor Office of Media and Entertainment. So if someone comes to you as a gardener and they say, oh, I want to take some pictures for my personal use, then they will not need to get a permit from the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. If they say, oh, I want to take pictures to display in, let's say, Vogue magazine, then they will have to get a permit for to film or photograph or to take photos in the garden. So just want to make sure everyone is clear. So if taking photos or filming is something just personal, they do not need a permit. But once it becomes commercial, then they will need a permit for that to take pictures and to film. Next slide. So COVID policies. So as you all know, things are very different now, especially with COVID. And just note that this is changing daily. So what we might say here today may not be in effect for 30 days from now, but this is the latest information that we have regarding the COVID policy update. Green Thumb Community Garden Groups operating on NYC Parks property may host public events with prior written approval from Green Thumb by filling out our permit approval request form. So if you don't know how to get the permit approval request form, you should speak to your OC, and I think it's on the Green Thumb's website. So you can always fill it out there. Attendance at all approved events will be capped at 25 people. Now, that's depending on the size and layout of your garden and what type of event you're having. So say if you want to have a Halloween event and you want about 50 people throughout the day, you also have to count the number of volunteers that you have, along with how many people you are expecting. So if you're expecting 50 throughout the day, then that probably won't work. And how many people are going to be in the garden during that time frame. So, and make sure that all, like when you're counting, that everyone is social distancing, so that so if there's a table, the next table have to be 6 feet from that first table. And if your garden is a small garden in size, then you might not be able to hold 25 people at one time. So it all depends on the size and layout of your garden. A garden member must remain on site at all times to ensure observance of public health requirements by all attendees. So what this means is that if someone, as mentioned before, if they want to come in and film or take photos, they are allowed to do that, but a garden member must be on site at all times. So if someone come in and say, oh, I want to use the garden, and they get the prior approval, then a garden member must remain on site at all times. They just can't just take over the garden. A garden member must be there. Due to the ongoing pandemic, garden groups will need to affirm that they agree to all required COVID-19 practices. So once you submit your event approval form request, then you will get an email from Green Thumb, and it's a document, and it states that yes, you will have 25 or less people, you will social distance, what measures, it asks you what measures are you taking to ensure the safety of others. So you might say, oh, there'll be like 2 hand sanitizer pumps that people can use throughout the event. So more detail is definitely better than less details when it comes to filling out these forms. Events and their details should be agreed upon by the garden group following their decision-making process. Eternal garden meetings and workdays do not require approval, as Claudia had mentioned earlier. So there are events that require approval, which are art and like a music event or a Halloween event, or but if you're having like a volunteer day, or sorry, if you're having a garden meeting, then that's not required for approval. Next slide.
Thank you, Twywana.
Oh, I'm sorry, Claudia. Someone asked, are the policies located somewhere? The policies are on the New York City Parks Department website. And the policy should be on Green Thumb's website as well.
We'll be emailing that. We know that we've talked about a lot of links today and a lot of policies you might not have heard of before, so we'll make sure to email you that. And I know sometimes it's not necessarily easy to find stuff on our website, so we'll be sure we direct you to that page. But good question. Thanks, Twywana. So now we've gotten through all the policies, so let's get back to the fun stuff of talking more about event planning. So in addition to all of the different all of the different aspects of event planning, another important aspect that sometimes is not given too much thought is actually design. So when we initially planned this workshop, it incorporated both event planning and design because they both, go together really well of how you can make your space more inviting. So Twywana mentioned, some events at the beginning. We've been talking a lot about this Earth Day, right? This Earth Day activity that can take place in different gardens. So some community events that our gardens have had, and just to give you an idea, maybe you've already had these at your gardens, but it can be centered on, music and arts, on food and nutrition. And so music and arts, it's more sort of like a community celebration, for instance. It could be tied to a block party where you would incorporate like finding a permit such as the SAPO permit in order to incorporate that. It can also be a very fun event, but much more small scale, focusing on workshops of food and nutrition, health and wellness, right? That's more with the goal of educating your community. And you can still get a rather large turnout, but you just have to incorporate different ideas in order to pull this off really well, have a successful event. Other community events can also include a focus on culture, sustainability, and environment. And you can also tie that into trying to incorporate a membership drive and also a garden workday. So what all of these have in common is thinking about space, of how to make your space accommodating and welcoming to community members, not just your garden members, right? But people that you're trying to draw in, because this is events for the broader community. So first thing that we recommend is thinking about what may be some spatial challenges that your garden faces. Even if your garden is small, you can still have quite a nice event. You just have to think about some key components of what incorporates into having a successful event. So first things is you want to make sure that it's an inviting space. You want to have a welcome sign if possible. You also want to make sure that there's clear and wide paths, especially if you're having an event that you want to attract for the broader community. So if you have any people in the community that may be seniors, folks with mobility issues, you want to make sure that you have clear, wide paths. This is a little bit different necessarily from the garden being fully accessible, that there will be a workshop about that on Monday, actually, about ADA accessible gardens. But at the very minimum, if you're having an event, please definitely think about having clear, wide paths. Another aspect that you want to incorporate is having communal gathering space with a lot of seating. So you see this example in this picture of like logs sort of in a semicircle to get people to sort of sit together, have conversations. It's also part of that welcoming atmosphere. And finally, you want to make sure that your garden has a clear entrance with lots of visibility into the garden. This is very important because it allows people to see what's happening. It makes sure that people know, let people know that it's not an exclusive garden, that the community is welcome. So making sure that your garden is maintained, it looks nice, it looks welcoming and inviting are also very important keys, you know, to making sure you have a successful garden events. So in our in-person workshop, we used to actually provide time for people to draw and map out what their event would look like. In the handout that we're going to give you, there is a space for mapping this out. And this is just an example of a garden in the Bronx that was sort of being redone to also think about this more welcoming aspect. So there could be a place where there's a children's reading area. So we were just thinking about this as an example for something like that. But you see here in this example how there's multiple areas. There's areas for raised beds, right? Focused on that food production piece, but there's also this piece right here of the semicircle. Well, these are actually raised beds, but this is also a good example of having, you know, an example of a semicircle where people can come and sit together. And this area right here to the left was meant to be sort of a learning area for children. So again, just think about incorporating design into your event planning because that also helps to make sure you're having a successful event. So what I'd like to go over now is just, we talked a lot about these handouts. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen for a little bit so we can go to review some of these handouts that we're gonna be emailing to you. So just bear with me 1 second, please. And then you can let me know if you see this. Twywana, can you see this? Yes, okay. So yeah. The first, okay, great. So the first item that I wanna show you, this is what we call the Event Planning Workshop Toolkit. It reviews the main points that Twywana talked about at the beginning, which is first things is the why, right? Why do you want to have your event, and the what, who, how? So the establishing those goals. What is the purpose of this project or event? Who is the audience you're targeting? How does this event relate to your mission and vision? And then also begin by writing 2 to 3 goals for the event. Once you have that all figured out, maybe you know that in your head already, but it's always good to jot it down. This helps you get started. So as you scroll down in this toolkit, there's also the section for writing down all the tasks. Now that you have, right, like the mission and the vision set out, all of that lined up, you want to list the components of the events that you want to have. Make sure that all of this relates to the goals, right? And what are the things you're going to need to be able to accomplish this? What are the tasks? So the next page, that you want to also think about is any anticipated problems with tasks and suggested solutions. This is not essential, but you also want to think about that. For instance, rain, right? Like if you're planning to have an outdoor, a garden concert and there's going to be instruments involved, like what would be a potential solution? Maybe having a tent, maybe having a rain date. So just think about that as well. This is that section where you want to problem solve. Next in this worksheet is thinking about that aspect of roles, making sure that you delegate. If you are the event planner or if you're the core team, make sure you're jotting that down. You're also assigning team leaders, especially if you have concurrent activities taking place during your event. You even want to think about setup, right? Because you don't want to be the only person that is there from the beginning and there at the end. You want to have that planned in advance if possible. And usually, you know, gardens is very communal. People will participate, but you always just want to make sure that you let people know in advance so they can plan out their day a little bit if they know that they have to stay for cleanup or if they have to set up in advance. You can even have a timekeeper the day of. So there's so many roles that one can come up with, but this is just an example of some of the different some of the different roles that can happen during event planning. And we recommend this as well because it allows different members to step up based on their skills and talents, right? Where if you're thinking about community assets, this is also very important just to think about different people just being able to feel ownership of this event and feeling like they're contributing to something. It truly helps in making the garden come together rather than it being just centered on one person. All right, so that's the roles. Then you want to also think about your material and resource checklist. And as we talked about, making sure that you are using that concurrently with your budget. So this is the material resource list, where as we mentioned, you're writing down your tasks, the materials you needed, and what's available in the garden, what's available outside. And this is where that shoestring piece comes into play because you're trying to minimize the things that you're buying, right? You want, if you're identifying an item and it's available outside the garden, you want to think about who in your community can you tap into to maybe donate in kind, to maybe donate a service. For example, back to that Earth Day event, if you want to have a face painting, for instance, maybe there's a community member who could donate their time as being, you know, the person that's doing the face painting, and perhaps they can also donate the materials. So this is very important to have in mind just as you're completing your budget. And this is just a little chart that Twywana was talking about, but we do encourage you to also add in estimated costs and the actual cost. Then we have the run of show aspect in this toolkit. And like I said, if you don't want to fill out any other sheet, then at least introduce something like this in your planning process, which states the time, the people responsible, the team leaders, or whoever is in charge of this. You also want to write down what is your activity, right? And the materials you need. So this is from start to end. If your event finishes at 11 and you have different activities happening until 1, you want to jot that down, and you also want to leave some time for cleanup at the end. I would even recommend that. So this is, I would say, the most important piece, just making sure that your run of show is written down and that everybody does receive a copy of this run of show. It's important for transparency, for people to feel involved and included, but also to, you know, give you a peace of mind that this agenda lives somewhere and you're going to flow through it smoothly because you've thought about all of the potential issues that might also come up. And let me see, this is, we're going to get into this a little bit later, but this is actually the outreach piece. We're going to talk about that after your breakout activity, but this is where you identify the materials you need to promote your event. We have a few outreach strategies that are, you know, that are successful through time, which includes tabling, flyering, and of course now social media, which is totally necessary for many types of events. Of course, you can still rely on good old word of mouth, and that's where, you know, you would do flyering, tabling, all good for word of mouth, and social media is certainly important. This toolkit also has a section for the garden layout. This is where we were talking about the mapping activity. This is where you can draw and just make sure that, you know, if you're trying to sort of reconfigure some part of the garden to ensure that it's a space where people can communally sit, maybe you can just identify where does this go, and then identify where you want to place the chairs or a bench. You want to make sure that if there's any area that you know, doesn't have clear pathways, you could draw it there. Not necessary, but you know, it is something that can help you. So this is the toolkit, like I said, that we put together. The next sheet that I want to show you is that community asset piece, which is nothing but a bunch of circles, but it is good to just think about, you know, here at the center is you, your community garden, your event. And then these little circles are who are your partners in the community, what are organizations that are your partners, and how do you both benefit from this event, right? Maybe you can help promote like a local business, maybe just many different things, many different ways that people can benefit. So this is a standard tool that's used like in thinking about community organizing, just very much identifying those partnerships. This next worksheet we didn't talk about, but we also include in your handouts because it's a super simple chart of just a timeline of if you are planning your event, there's many different timelines that you can start from. Some people start planning 4 months in advance. Twywana plans a year in advance for our big events. You don't have to do that, but you can if you want to, right? We would say try to plan as far in advance as possible if you can, if that's at all a possibility. This type of worksheet just gives you some opportunity to be able to write it all down, the different tasks, or, you know, if in April you want to start thinking about the forming your team for an event that's taking place in September, you know, this worksheet just gives you an idea of what is your work plan. So you always want to make sure that you're doing this in advance, especially if you're trying to do it on a shoestring, right? Because that means you're going to have to source in kind, you're going to have to gain those community partnerships. So that always takes time. So we recommend having some kind of a timeline that you're working out of. And then finally, this is the events flowchart that I was talking about. This is just a complicated flowchart that just goes through what the events process is, if anybody is at all interested about that. So I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint presentation. Let me know if you can see that. Can you see that, Twywana? Yeah, okay. So now we've talked a whole lot. We've given you a lot of information. We've talked a lot about handouts. If nobody has any questions so far, before we take our 5-minute break, we just want folks to actually work on a group activity. So what everybody's gonna do, it's actually gonna be 15 minutes rather than 20 minutes, just because we're trying to end a little bit early. So in groups of 3 to 5, you are gonna work in a breakout group. We're gonna put you guys in breakout groups. You're gonna review a separate scenario, and you're gonna design your event. And I think that's everybody, huh? Yeah, we got through all 3 groups. So that was really great. And now what we want to do is just go through a little bit of outreach. I mean, it sounds like you're all pros at outreach, but just for anybody who's new to thinking about how to engage communities and doing just some broad outreach, here's 3 strategies that can help you. We already kind of covered it in the event planning toolkit info, but thinking about like what are some materials you can use to promote for your events, right? And one of the strategies is tabling, identifying a local event where you can table and drop off any materials. You can also do flyering, right, to really get that word of mouth. So you're identifying places in the community where people regularly visit. This would include places such as laundromats, bodegas, community centers, anywhere where community frequents, especially, you know, once you've identified who it is you're targeting, whether it's seniors, whether it's youth that the groups here identified, you want to make sure that you are, you know, reaching out to them. And then finally, of course, actually for flyering, you can also consider door knocking, even if you really want to get into the more grassroots, like really getting the word out there. And of course, you also want to make a plan, right? When you're flyering, how often do you want to do it? What's feasible? What do members have time for in terms of that outreach? All of that just really important to be very intentional. And then social media, you want to develop some kind of social media plan and can make some considerations like how far in advance would you like to post? Is it monthly? Is it weekly? Is it just as you get closer to the date? If you're using Instagram, do you want to use like particular posts, but also stories? Do you want to use any kind of other software to help you create events, or just free platforms like Canva? We'll talk about that in a second. But there's also different social media platforms, right, that reach different audiences like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. They all reach different audiences. So that is important for your event as well. And if there's no social media available, like if your group is not really social media user, then you definitely want to use those 2 other strategies of tabling and flyering to get the word out there. All right, so in addition to that, here is just a standard flyer that we like because it's very catchy, bright, and it's sort of minimalist in text. So this is pretty important when you're trying to get the word out there about your event, if you're flyering, or even if you have, especially this type of flyer, it's kind of meant more for social media, because if you print it, right, it would kind of be allowed to print out in these bright colors, but this is, like I said, more of a social media flyer. But regardless of what kind of flyer, whether it's you share on social media or you print, you want to have some core information there. So that key information is writing the name of the event, having some kind of eye-catching image if possible, not just text, right? Because then that's not as fun. You want to make it kind of fun and target it to the population you're trying to, have arrive at your event. You want to have the date, you want to have the location, the time. If there's a website, you want to also write that down. So that's sort of the core information that you want to have. But in addition to that, some other optional information to include are also the things that a person needs to bring if they're going to be a participant. Maybe keywords about the event. You could even write the event mission. You can add in the mission about your garden. You can mention, that you're looking for new members, or you can mention the frequency of your events. There's a ton of things that you can mention, but we just want to mention to try to not cram in, your text in there. You want to make sure that whatever core information is there is really sticking out to people. So just don't have a flyer that's filled with text, because that might be too much. So just think about that as you're creating your flyer. One tool that is available to help create flyers is called Canva. We'll also be sure to include that link in the follow-up email that we send to you, but it's just free. There is an option for a free account where you can create some of these basic flyers. Well, I think that was it for questions, right? So I'm gonna actually stop recording now. We want to thank everybody for participating on events on the Shoestring. We hope you enjoyed this workshop and can use some of this information in your next event.